Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are joined today by Henry Tillman, the founder of Asia Investment Research and the CEO of Ayana Research, to discuss and, would add to educate us on what is happening in the world of nuclear energy and, of course, also the geopolitics of it. So, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me. And it's an important time because so much has happened in such a short period of time.
Yes, we were discussing earlier. You mentioned within the past 35 days, you had just one revolutionary development after the other. And well, you and I have previously discussed some developments such as China's development of thorium, uh, the so-called thorium revolution, which is giving China 60,000 years of cheap energy. But as we see, the India and Russia are also working on this with as developing the first thorium-based small modular reactor. I was wondering if you can delve into some of the things which are currently happening, because this is quite extraordinary. And as I was suggesting, this also changes the world of geopolitics or geoeconomics quite significantly.
Again, thank you. So I'm delighted to be able to present all this data, which I don't think anyone's presented in a single compact presentation. So there's so much to cover in a 30-minute period of time. From the period of the 28th of July of this year to the 2nd of September, 35 days, four major nuclear partnerships were either formed or strengthened among countries. And of course, it caps off for the fifth with an LNG with the power of Siberia, as you well know. So let's jump into each of these separately. The first is on the 28th and 29th of July, when ENIC, which is the Emirates Nuclear Energy Company, and Korea partnered to expand their prior partnerships. So ENIC, with a lot of help from Korea, built the Arab world's largest nuclear power plant, which is fully functional as of 2024 over a 15-year period. That was KEPCO nuclear power reactors, power and backed up by a Korean workforce. There were 2,300 Korean workers in the 18,000 workers to make this largest, but not only the largest nuclear power plant in the Arab world, but also 25% of the power, the energy for all of the UAE. Now, ENIC, because of its links to the UAE, has been obviously part of COP28. In a COP28, you realize that the world has 22 countries, that are even more now, 31, I think now, have agreed to build nuclear power aggressively around the world, safe civilian nuclear power over the next 30 years to get to the point of 30% of the world's power by 2050. So ENIC itself was quite aggressive post COP28 in investing in several SMR companies. And again, they partnered with both Samsung and Hyundai, as I mentioned before. Samsung both of them have either humans that they have technology they've brought to it, the construction skills, and or new technology to compartmentalize SMRs, which was launched in June of this year. So that the combination of actual physical help, trained physical help, backed with technological changes in construction of these SMRs, was a powerful force linking these two countries together to elevate, if you will, to a global nature. In addition, the two together have investments in 13 SMRs. There are only 80 SMRs in the world, so that's a pretty big partnership in SMRs alone, which they could advance. In addition, ENIC is related to TAQA. It's controlled by TAQA. TAQA is a major financing force to actually accelerate investments in these SMRs around the world. So quite an important launch on 28, 29 July this year. Again, a leader in UAE and leaders in Korea to take this to the next level. Now, not to be outdone, 2 days later, on the 31st of July, the U.S. announces, as part of the negotiations with Korea, a comprehensive program to strengthen the U.S. base in shipping and also nuclear power. But before I jump into that, I should also note that actually a couple of months before that, President Trump pushed very hard in making changes to U.S. local laws, of DOE, DOD, et cetera, to push through changes, rapid changes into nuclear power, just like he did in COVID a few years ago. So all those changes were pushed through rapidly, and he mandated that there should be some type of functional SMRs of some sort by 2026. 3 SMRs under DOD. That's very, very aggressive. In addition, prior to this, Korea has been very active in looking at shipping and worldwide shipping and offshore SMRs. There's about 3 years of record on this, basically post COP28. You've been both pre and post COP28. And also the Koreans purchased in 2024 the U.S. Philadelphia-based shipyards to build ships, which was the U.S. production was roughly 1.5 ships a year, where Korea is building 40 ships per year. So you could see there's a gap not only that Trump saw, not only in the nuclear production in the SMRs, but also a gap led also by his friends in the need for AI powering, but also there's a huge gap in shipping. So therefore, that was all wrapped into those negotiations at the end of July with the Korean U.S. trade negotiations, which ended with Korea only paying a 15% tariff on the goods versus a 25% being discussed, in exchange for Korea committing $350 billion to building ships in the U.S. on a rapid basis. So they have a small base. As I told you, that base costs $100 million. That's it. But they have a base of that current base can do really 1.5 ships per year. They need to get to at least 10 ships per year. So there needs to be a huge investment to make that work. And that's part of the big deal between, if you will, to close the gap in shipbuilding between what's happening in China and Russia. And that's, started immediately because they've already been operating since last year. And what I find interesting is basically there's a lot of capability from ex-military Navy people in and around the area they could use to restaff this thing sooner rather than later. Yes, so that's to accelerate shipbuilding and therefore accelerate SMRs in the USA. But despite all that, there was no link to thorium, which we'll talk about later. We talked about before and we'll talk about later. And there was also no link to icebreakers. So as you know, the U.S. policy is to be part of the Arctic operations, whether it's oil and gas, defense, or whatever. And there's a huge gap in icebreakers, which I first highlighted in a presentation I made in October 19. In October of 2019 in Iceland. The gap is Russia has 41 icebreakers, 8 of those are nuclear icebreakers, which can stay operating in the NSR and Northern Seaboard for up to 7 months without any need to top them up or bring them back. And the U.S. has 1 that's about 40 years old. The Coast Guard's recently purchased another one. They're trying to convert from commercial into government usage. And they also have 1 around for sort of spare parts or if you will, a research point of view. So while everyone was transfixed on the Alaska meetings between Russia and between Putin and Putin and my parents, Putin and Trump, the actual focus, while there wasn't progress made necessarily, as we've seen to date on Ukraine, there has been a lot of progress made on the Arctic and the cooperation between the U.S. and Russia in the Arctic and at those discussions. And the first of those, which is concrete, which is a signature by Putin on a decree, which leaves it open from ExxonMobil to reinvest in Sakhalin, which they lost as part of the 2022 movements, and they lost a lot of money in the process. But they've left it open for Sakhalin to retake that stake by the end of 26, provided that the sanctions are lifted. That's number one. Number two, Trump has made it clear that he'd like, and I think his own words, is he wants to also have 40 beautiful icebreakers. Now, I'm not sure Putin could build in 40 icebreakers in a hurry, but I'm sure that's what he said, at least in a press conference in North Carolina. So I think there's a real willingness to collaborate on building icebreakers together. So again, Arctic oil from ExxonMobil, icebreakers we're talking about here, and also links from U.S. equipment to help gasification for Russia. So this is so far we've had, yes, from July 28th to August 15th, all this happened, right? That's in about 2.5 weeks, basically. And then we come to the SCO, and at the SCO, of course, there was a bilateral between India and Russia. Now, India and Russia have been collaborating, as you know, Glenn, for many, many years, decades in nuclear power. But what's new this time is that India has really grasped the nettle on nuclear power. So they've come through with a very strong budget to develop it, and it makes sense because, as we said before, they're sitting on a pile, the world leadership position in thorium, and they're looking at all different options to transfer, their if you take capabilities and uranium into thorium. So the combination of those things have led to a series of cooperations between India and Russia, and I think one of those you mentioned to before about the willingness to collaborate on thorium power, if you will, between the two countries. That was announced in May, but it was confirmed by the president of Rosatom on the 2nd of September when they were, I think 1st of September when they were together in Beijing. Yes, in addition, there's also a discussion that they were willing to commit to help build Gen 4 capabilities, Gen 4 nuclear capabilities, reactor capabilities in India. The only current Gen 4 that's functional reactor capabilities in China. While there are 13 countries building Gen 4 capabilities for nuclear reactors, China leads it with one, but also Russia's just behind them. So in essence, you see a collaboration, if you will, threefold collaboration between China, Russia, and India in this one. Number one. Two is a link between Russia and India to build if you will, a cluster and also China, a cluster of nuclear power in the Far East, where India would be a part of that. The same would be true in shipping with the Arctic, with ports, as you see already, and logistics, again, with Russia, India, and Arctic shipping. And of course, this goes into Russian LNG, which also then goes into payments, which are non-US denominated. So there's a lot of things happening on those three already, basically. So much, as I say, much is happening. That's through the SCO piece of it. I might also add that that works also the flows the other way, which is Rosatom is actually has decided to build a plant in China where China would build, if you will, the various different production needs of Rosatom to expand FNPBs around the world, or SMRs around the world. Yeah, so that links Russia and China together. Yes, so you'll recognize there's a lot of interactivity among these three countries, which I think from your Russian history, you'll know more than a bit about.
Yeah, well, the optics of it was also quite on display at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in China. And I think, we both have thought of the Primakov triangle coming into fruition because, well, for those who don't remember Primakov, he was, the foreign minister and prime minister of Russia. And there was this dramatic event when in 1999 when he was on a plane to Washington to discuss the tensions in Kosovo. And as this happened, the Americans began and NATO began attacking Yugoslavia against, international law. Anyways, he turned the plane around in the sky, and this became very symbolic of what was happening. And well, the context was important because in the 90s, the Russians had this goal of integrating with the West, having this common European home, all of this. But instead, they realized, because this attack came 12 days after NATO expanded for the first time, which signaled there would be a new Europe, a hegemonic Europe, one which Russia would not belong to. And in this new hegemonic Europe, the international law would be, and the United Nations would be subordinated because the NATO would come first. Again, this was a hegemonic piece. And the reason why this was so significant is this is when the Russians kind of began to lose hope in the future of this common Europe. And Primakov was the first one then who came out and suggested that we would need a multipolar international system, something to constrain the political West and its ambitions to run the world through a hegemon. And he had then identified these three pillars, that is Russia, India, and China. This triangle was required in order to have a more balanced international system, one where international law could come first. The goal wasn't to defeat the US like a bloc politics, but to constrain, to end the hegemonic ambitions, and have a more balanced international system. Now, the problem I remember back in 1999 was obviously that neither China nor India had either the capabilities to the economic power to push back against this hegemonic model which the West was advancing, also by expanding NATO. And also, they didn't have the willingness, the preparedness. So but kind of the general ideas then were already being hatched, and this was kind of an important moment because they realized this unipolar or hegemonic world order was unacceptable. And in order to balance it, we need to form this partnership with China and India. And again, this sounded a bit like science fiction in 1999, but it is interesting now that we see this come actually being born here. But also that's why I found the energy sector to be so interesting, because we're all now talking about the new world economy being built around the AI and digital platforms. But the one thing you need for this new industrial revolution is cheap energy to fuel all these data centers. And again, this has always been the case. Energy is the source of civilizational rise. So the fact that they have all this, I guess, energy partnerships now linking these three countries together is quite fascinating. But how advanced are they, though? I know we've spoken before about thorium, but I guess people are not familiar with what the thorium revolution actually entails. Why is this so significant, though, in this partnership?
Maybe I may add a couple more points. That's one of the points. I'd say the lead point within that is Russia, is India's rise and wanting to be a major player and a leader in the world in new energy. It's extraordinary change and innovation. Where I think of my experience in India from an advisory point of view, as I've seen, just like Trump's experience in the US, I've seen resistance within components within India. Modi's a different leader. Modi has just risen above it and said, here's what we're going to do. And the extraordinary changes in the budget. And they have a program which has been all along saying, here's the creep in the 1950s. Here's where we're going to go from uranium to thorium back in the 50s. But now they have incremental steps. And they're actually taking a step in the middle, not just with Russia. The first bridge technology in thorium has actually come from the US, called Core Energy, from the US into India, which they've opened up as the end of August this year. So India is very progressive about this. It's not just Russia. It's also wherever the technology is to bridge that transition. They've always talked about it, but now they're focused on doing it. That's the big change. So I think and they've always wanted to get to thorium. Now they have the drive to do it. The drive at the top, and they have the funds they've allocated to do it. And now they'll seek the best resources, whether it's Russia, U.S., or whatever. So that's a big change as well, I think, from an India point of view. The second thing I said about your energy is, and I finished this again on September 2nd, which is the power of Siberia. Yes, game changer. So in essence, we now have a new party to add to your triangle, which is called Mongolia. And that will go through Yamal, through Mongolia to Beijing. And that's a game changer in terms of LNG. And I think President Xi's words around that were quite strong, saying that we should focus on making this happen. Yes, and we should not be deterred by external forces, which means if someone in my interpretation, I'm not a military guy. My father was, but I'm not. My read of that is, don't even think about using your Western friends to attack this in terms of being built from Russia to China. So I'll leave that to you in greater geopolitical minds, but it's a strong statement. It's increasing the flows directly. And it also, again, proves that the growth in Russia will be towards China and towards India and further places, South Asia and Africa, and not headed to the West. And the West probably didn't do themselves any favor by losing that global LNG. So these are game changers again. Another one on the 2nd of September.
Yeah, this was extraordinary to me, and it went kind of unnoticed, surprisingly, in the Western media. This is doubling the gas flows from Russia to China, but it wasn't even the Asian, the gas from located in the Asian part of Russia. This is from Yamal in the Arctic.
That's correct.
This was the stuff that was going to fuel the European economies for decades, providing cheap, reliable energy, which would be important for the industry's economic competitiveness. And as you know, we celebrate the death of Nord Stream and how independent we are of Russian energy without actually replacing it with something sustainable. We forgot that again, there's the main component of multipolarity is the ability to have this economic coercion. It diminishes when you have alternative partners, and you see now this whole gas flow just going into China instead. And for me, this is just extraordinary because in the era of cheap energy, one of the reasons why the Chinese are so competitive on the AI front and everything else is also because it's like the only place where the energy prices are actually falling, where the rest of in the West it's going up and up. So it's it's extraordinary that we're not thinking more about this though.
Anyway, 35 days, 5 different partnerships in the nuclear LNG world around the world. I never thought I'd live to see this time, but it's happened.
How significant though is the Arctic development? Because with you mentioned Russia with its 41 icebreakers, several of them nuclear powered. But how significant is the ambitions by China and the United States to, I guess, join in and have the same or similar capabilities?
You're being kind to me, but you probably didn't realize I was one of the 3 authors from the 2018 paper in the northern route. So I was one of those 3 joint authors for that. So I don't think you knew that, but thank you for asking the question. So as the ice melts, it makes a huge difference, right? In transit times and security. Of course, security has to be done in conjunction with the Russian government. So it's a fraction of the time that you go in other routes, and also the cost is much, much lower. I presented this initially in 2021 in Reykjavik, and the U.S. government was all there to see all these numbers. They saw it at the time. They were busy doing other things, but at any rate, it's the future. It is the future, and as the northern sea route continues to open up with the global warming, as it will, it's a vital component of it. And Trump knows this. They've known this. But it was all the numbers were there for them, and the DOE was there, and the DOD was there when I was presenting the information. They saw back then. I think now there's much more focus on it, though. I think there's a realization, and I think Greenland highlights this. That's my speculation. I don't know, but if you're going to play in the Arctic, you've got to be a major player, and you can't be there. And this is all going to happen. It's going to get greater. The flows are going to get greater and greater, in my opinion. And it's all to go farther and farther east, which is why they're all in a lot of L-stock, right? And those ports are increasing, right? And so there's more to the India-Russia piece, which is logistics, ports, and cheap energy. And. I think it's broader because, again, India is we're talking about countries that are scientific in nature, right? China, Russia, India are based on science. UK here, we're based on political PPEs, right? We educate people, and the USA is known around the world for lawyers. These other countries are known for science. Different world.
Well, it is fascinating that the Arctic corridor, that this is also something that's tying these three Eurasian giants together, because China obviously it has refers to itself as a near Arctic power, but its access to the Arctic, which it conceptually integrates into the Belt and Road Initiative or the Silk Road, with calling it the Polar Silk Road, is quite obvious. But the Indian one is also fascinating because, as you suggested, linking the India's port of in Chennai with with
Yeah.
Vladivostok
Yeah.
is also intended to integrate India into this Arctic corridor. So everyone seems to be participating in this, though. Well, except for the Europeans now, of course. But I did want to ask about what you see in the possible Arctic relationship with Russia and the United States, because again, this is another giant which ideally would participate in some of these projects. And indeed, when we see now the US-Russia negotiations, especially with Ukraine, it appears that a lot of the goal is for the Americans to decouple a bit from the Ukraine war, to let the Europeans do this on their own. And so the Americans and the Russians can focus more on bilateral issues. And when we speak of bilateral issues, one gets the impression that the Arctic could be a significant component of this. That is, energy projects, transportation, and yeah, all the other activities there, which would be, I guess, good to reduce some of this zero-sum rivalry. But do you see anything in the pipeline, though, in terms of cooperation, as opposed to only having this fierce competition?
No, I see the U.S. I see the U.S. and Russia definitely wanting to cooperate, both sides. As I said, Exxon is very keen. Exxon wrote off $4.5 billion when they had to leave Sakhalin, and they lost right on the balance sheet, and 200 million of P&L effect immediately. So that's a huge hit. And I forget how much the U.S. had to write off. I don't want to say the wrong number, but it's billions, multiple billions, and when they had to leave. So there's a natural flow between the countries, and of course, the Arctic is what's driving it, and it will continue to drive it as there's more and more ice melt. So it has to happen, and Trump understands this, and Putin understands this, and I'm sure they are trying to figure out a way to make this work in the constraints that are currently existing around Ukraine. But I wouldn't bet against it. I think they're both driven to know this is the right thing to do over a period of time, and it will happen, in my opinion. Broad across the energy world. Yes, I mentioned 3 specific things in my little piece earlier about this, right?
Well, a last question, though, is just about what do you see coming up, what we can expect in the energy world, because I know this is a difficult thing necessarily to project, especially given how fast these projects are being announced, and the world keeps spinning faster and faster here. But all of these initiatives, they're not happening in a vacuum or unrelated to each other. There's a larger push here. I was just wondering, what is it that we can expect seeing in if not the months or the weeks or the years ahead in the energy world?
More and more innovation. They get continued development of innovation. As I just mentioned to you, there's now a transitional fuel the U.S. is developing for India in their SMRs to bridge to thorium. There's all kinds of innovation happening. I mean, my life is around various forms of energy. I wouldn't underestimate anything. There's so many different forms of looking at. I'm now talking about magnesium batteries, right? In several countries in Africa and the UK here, not lithium. The energy world has continued to see loads and loads of innovation, and that's why it's an exciting time to be in this industry. It's not just 900 years of coal out of Russia, which is Putin's own words recently, the supply of coal for the next 900 years, but it's actually the innovation that goes with it. Various forms of fission, fusion, etc. It's all happening. So when we talk to a country about a portfolio of energy, it's like a portfolio of investments. You look at your portfolio and say, where is it today? Where's it going to be in the near term? Well, I was trying to show you today in this small discussion is this is a snapshot of where it is today. And I think, and the biggest change to me in this discussion, and what makes what you talked about, the triangle, is India desired to be a global leader, in particular in thorium. That's a major change, and being driven by Modi.
That's important. All that aspiration by by India is also, I think, important to kind of make sense also of why the Indians pushed so hard against the U.S. efforts in order for India to begin to, I guess, sort of subordinate itself to Washington's policies in terms of cutting itself off of Russia and all. I mean, if you want to be a great power, which India obviously does, it can't allow itself to have its national interests subordinated to the United States or its great power goals to simply then give up on this and become a frontline almost. So no, it's fascinating stuff, which is
But there are lots of reasons, when you look at a piece of art, there's lots of things see in a piece of art. So I think what you're putting your finger on is one of the pieces. I think there's several reasons behind what was taken. So I'm not a geopolitician. I'll leave that to you. So I'll just stick with my data.
no, the Indians, they have many other
I
things.
think there are other reasons.
Yeah, many others. But it is interesting that the great power aspect though is it must be one of the components as well. But one worth taking into account.
They want to be a world leader in power and nuclear. Amazing. They actually set it out. They set it out in 1953, 54, and now they're doing it. Pretty amazing. The bridge to thorium.
Well, we live in interesting times. So Henry, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge and insights with us.
Thank you so much. Always, Glenn. Okay. Thanks so much. Bye for now.